What happens when a ruthless gang targets a frail black veteran, thinking his age and solitude make him an easy victim, only to find out his son is a general in the United States military? Watch as father and son fight back against the racist gang, and eventually uncover a deeper secret that has plagued the black community for too long. James Carter sat on the wooden bench, his cane leaning against his leg. The warm afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the path ahead. The faint hum of distant conversations mingled with the occasional laughter of children playing nearby. This park was a haven for many, but for James, it was a place of reflection. At 68, he had earned the right to enjoy quiet moments like these, free from the noise of the world. He shifted slightly, leaning back as a breeze swept through the park. The afternoon light illuminated his weathered face, the lines etched there telling stories of battles fought and sacrifices made. Once a soldier, now a retired man with a cane, he carried himself with the quiet dignity of someone who had seen more than his fair share of life. From across the way, a group of 3 men appeared, their voices breaking the tranquility. They walked with a swagger that was impossible to ignore, their laughter grating against the calm. The tallest of them, a wiry man with a cocky grin, spotted James and nudged the others. James noticed them, but kept his gaze forward, unwilling to engage. His instincts, honed by years of experience, told him trouble was brewing. The 3 men, no, boys, he corrected himself, were looking for entertainment, and James, sitting alone with his cane, looked like an easy mark. "Hey, old man," one of them called out, his voice loud enough to make heads turn. James didn't react, letting the comment slide as he shifted his gaze to the trees. He'd heard worse in his lifetime and didn't see any point in giving them the satisfaction of a response. "Yo, Gramps, we're talking to you," another chimed in, stepping closer. Their sneakers scuffed the pavement as they approached, the sound deliberate and mocking. James sighed softly, adjusting his grip on the cane. It wasn't fear that made him tense. It was annoyance. He had come to the park for peace, and now that peace was being rudely interrupted. "What's the matter? Too deaf to hear us, or just too stuck up to say hello?" The leader sneered, leaning forward with a crooked smile. James turned his head slowly, his eyes locking onto the group. His voice, calm but firm, cut through the tension. "Afternoon, gentlemen." The casual response seemed to disarm them momentarily, their laughter faltering. Then, as if to overcompensate, the leader smirked. "Gentlemen? That's rich. But we're not here for niceties, old man. We're here to remind you who runs this place." James didn't flinch. He simply studied them, his silence a deliberate statement. The leader took another step forward, his companions flanking him. The mood shifted, their amusement now tinged with hostility. They expected fear. What they found instead was an unshakable resolve. The tension hung in the air like a heavy cloud, the leader's crooked smile widening as he took another step forward. His companions followed suit, spreading out slightly to surround the bench where James sat. The afternoon sun highlighted their confident postures, their arrogance palpable. "You look real comfortable here, old man," the leader sneered, his tone dripping with condescension. "Like you think this place belongs to you." James didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he let his gaze sweep over the trio, his expression steady and calm. "What exactly do you want?" he asked, his voice low but clear. The leader chuckled, glancing back at his companions before turning back to James. "What do we want? Man, you're sitting in the wrong park to ask that question. Don't you know your place?" James raised an eyebrow, his grip tightening slightly on his cane. "And what place would that be?" The leader's face twisted into a sneer. "Anywhere but here. See, guys like us, we don't take kindly to outsiders trying to act like they belong. You know what I'm saying?" The words were a thinly veiled excuse, but James understood their real meaning. Racism wasn't subtle, and neither were these men. He leaned forward slightly, his calm demeanor masking the simmering anger beneath. "This park's open to everyone," he said simply. "But I'm guessing that's not what this is about, is it?" One of the others, a stocky man with a shaved head, barked a laugh. "Look at him, trying to play dumb, like he doesn't know exactly why we're here." James met their laughter with silence, his steady gaze never wavering. "I'd rather hear it from you," he said after a beat, his tone sharp enough to cut through their noise. The leader smirked, crossing his arms as he leaned closer. "You want to hear it? Fine. Guys like you think you can just walk around like you own the place, like we're supposed to just stand by and take it. Well, not today, old man. Today, you're gonna learn something." The venom in his voice didn't faze James. He'd faced hatred before, in far worse circumstances than this, but it didn't make the sting any less. He let their words settle, each one fueling the quiet fire within him. "You think I need to learn something?" James asked, his voice soft but firm. "No, I think it's you who needs the lesson." The leader's smirk faltered for a moment, then hardened into a scowl. "Oh, I think we'll teach you just fine." He gestured to his companions, who stepped closer, their movements synchronized like predators circling prey. "I won't be intimidated by a bunch of cowards," James said. The leader's smirk didn't waver as he circled James, his voice dripping with disdain. "Cowards? You think we're the cowards here?" he sneered, glancing at his companions. "No, you're the one who's out of place. You don't belong here. Never have." James's grip on his cane tightened, his calm demeanor hiding the fire simmering within. "Out of place?" he echoed, his voice steady but firm. "I've fought for this country. I've earned my place wherever I choose to be. What have you done that makes you so entitled to claim this park as yours?" The leader froze for a moment, caught off guard by the question. His sneer faltered, replaced by a flash of anger. "You want to know what I've done? I've watched people like you ruin everything. My old man lost his job to one of you. 20 years. Gone in a day. All because some company wanted to check their diversity box." James raised an eyebrow, his eyes narrowing. "So you blame me for something you don't understand? You think I walked into a company and demanded someone else's livelihood? You're using excuses to justify your hate." The stocky man to James's right interjected, his voice thick with resentment. "You don't get it. My family's been here for generations, working hard, building this place. Then people like you come in, acting like it's yours. Schools, jobs, neighborhoods. It's all slipping away." James let out a slow, deliberate breath, leaning forward slightly. "You think I don't know what it means to work hard? I've spent my entire life proving myself to people like you who believed I didn't belong. You think I didn't earn my place?" The leader's sneer twisted back into a grin, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, right. Bet you're gonna tell us your big sob story now. How you had it so hard. Let me guess, you started with nothing, worked your way up, and now you think you're better than us. Save it, old man." James's voice sharpened, cutting through their jeers. "I started with nothing, but not because of laziness or entitlement, like you want to believe. I fought in wars, buried brothers, and came home to a country that still didn't think I belonged. And now, decades later, I sit here in a public park, minding my own business, and I'm still dealing with the same hate." The leader laughed, but it was hollow, a weak attempt to mask his discomfort. "You think we care about your little war stories? That doesn't change the fact that you people ruin everything." James's gaze hardened. "The only thing ruining anything here is your hatred. It doesn't make you stronger. It makes you smaller." The wiry man, pacing restlessly behind James, finally snapped. "Shut up, old man. You don't know what you're talking about." He kicked James's cane, sending it clattering to the ground. James stumbled slightly, but caught himself on the edge of the bench. Straightening as much as his body allowed, he locked eyes with the leader, his voice unwavering. "You can knock me down all you want, but it won't make you right." The leader's face darkened, his smirk replaced by a scowl. "Oh, we'll do more than knock you down." The three men closed in, their postures rigid with aggression. The shadows of their figures stretched across the pavement as the sun dipped lower, their intent unmistakable. The three men circled closer, their jeers growing louder. But James remained seated, his sharp eyes tracking each of them. His body ached, his muscles protesting, but his mind was as sharp as ever. He slowly adjusted his posture, steadying himself against the bench, as if preparing for the inevitable. "You're just gonna sit there and take it?" the stocky man mocked, flexing his fists. His smirk widened as he stepped closer. "Maybe you ain't got the guts to stand up." James exhaled slowly, his voice calm but edged with steel. "I've stood up to men twice your size, and 10 times your strength. You're not the first bullies I've dealt with, and you won't be the last." The leader scoffed, stepping forward to loom over him. Big words from someone too scared to even get off the bench. "Maybe you're finally realizing you don't belong here." James didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached down, gripping the edge of the bench. With a slow, deliberate movement, he pushed himself to his feet. His frame, though worn by time, still carried the weight of someone who had once been unbreakable. The leader faltered for half a second, clearly not expecting James to stand. "What? You think you're going to take us on?" he sneered, masking his brief hesitation with bravado. James adjusted his stance, his voice calm but filled with conviction. "If I have to." The stocky man laughed loudly, shaking his head. "You're outnumbered, old man." "What? You think you're back in the army? This isn't some war zone." James's lips tightened, the fire in his gaze unmistakable. "Every day's a war zone when people like you try to tear others down." The tension snapped like a rubber band. The wiry man made the first move, lunging forward with a wild swing. James sidestepped with surprising agility, using the man's momentum against him. He grabbed the attacker's arm and twisted, sending the wiry man stumbling forward. Before James could reposition, the stocky man rushed in, his bulk aimed like a battering ram. James braced himself, shifting his weight to absorb the blow. Their bodies collided, and James staggered back, but remained upright. He retaliated with a sharp jab to the man's ribs, his knuckles finding their mark with practiced precision. "Not bad," the leader muttered, stepping forward. He feinted to the left before driving a knee toward James's midsection. The strike landed, and James grunted in pain, stumbling back a step. "You're getting old, soldier," the leader mocked, advancing again. James straightened, his face set in determination. "Old enough to know how to handle punks like you." The wiry man recovered, his expression twisted with rage. He charged again, aiming lower this time, attempting to sweep James's legs. James anticipated the move, shifting just enough to avoid the full brunt of the attack. The wiry man's momentum carried him off balance, and James delivered a hard elbow to his back, sending him sprawling to the ground. The leader, now visibly irritated, motioned for the stocky man. "Let's end this." The two advanced together, forcing James to retreat a step, then another. His body screamed for rest, but he refused to falter. The leader swung high, while the stocky man aimed low, their coordinated attack designed to overwhelm. James ducked the first blow and blocked the second with his arm, but the impact sent pain radiating through his body. Gritting his teeth, he lashed out with a kick to the stocky man's knee, momentarily halting his advance. "Enough games!" the leader barked, throwing a wild punch that clipped James's shoulder. The force sent him spinning, and he stumbled, his back hitting the bench. James gripped the edge for balance, his breath coming in short bursts. He was losing ground, and they knew it. The leader smirked, moving in for what he clearly thought would be the final blow. But James refused to fall. Pushing off the bench with a surge of determination, he swung with all his strength, his fist connecting squarely with the leader's jaw. The leader reeled back, clutching his face in shock. "Not bad," the stocky man growled, his fists raised. "But you're done now." The three men regrouped, their faces dark with anger. James stood his ground, battered but unyielding. The fight was far from over, but he wasn't about to give them the satisfaction of backing down. The leader wiped his mouth, his hand trembling slightly as he glared at James. The blow James had landed left a visible mark, but the fight had taken its toll on the older man as well. James's chest heaved, his breaths shallow and strained, but he refused to back down. He stood his ground, his shoulders squared, even as his legs wavered beneath him. "You don't know when to quit, do you?" the leader growled, his voice filled with venom. James straightened, his hand brushing against his aching side. "Quitting's not in my blood," he said, his voice defiant, despite the pain radiating through his body. The wiry man snarled, lunging forward with a reckless swing. James tried to block, but his reflexes, slowed by exhaustion, failed him. The blow landed against his ribs, driving the air from his lungs. The stocky man followed up, stepping in with a brutal shove that sent James stumbling backward. He hit the ground hard, the impact jarring every bone in his body. His cane lay just out of reach, and for the first time, he couldn't force himself to stand. The three men loomed over him, their faces twisted in triumph. The leader crouched slightly, his shadow falling across James's battered form. "This is what happens when you don't know your place," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "You should have stayed down the first time, old man." James's vision blurred, but his gaze remained locked on the leader. "You think this makes you strong? Beating on someone who can't fight back?" The leader laughed darkly, motioning for the others to close in. "It makes me smart. You didn't know when to stay quiet, so now you'll pay for it." As the leader raised his fist, a sharp, commanding voice sliced through the air like a whip. "Stand down!" The yell was so forceful that all three men froze, their heads snapping toward the sound. A figure strode toward them with purpose, his tall, broad frame cutting an imposing silhouette against the fading afternoon light. The man's military bearing was unmistakable. Every step radiated authority, every movement precise and deliberate. "What the hell is this?" the leader muttered, his confidence faltering as the figure drew closer. James, lying on the ground, managed a faint, weary smile. His voice, though hoarse, carried a note of relief. "Marcus!" The man's voice rang out again, louder this time, filled with unshakable command. "I said stand down." The gang hesitated, their earlier bravado beginning to crumble. They hadn't expected anyone to intervene, certainly not someone who carried himself like he could handle all three of them at once. Marcus stood tall, his presence commanding, his sharp eyes scanning the scene. He took in his father on the ground, bruised but defiant, and the three men standing over him. His jaw tightened, his hands clenching at his sides as he took another step forward. The leader sneered, his earlier hesitation melting into arrogance as he sized up the newcomer. "Who the hell are you supposed to be?" he asked, tilting his head mockingly. "Some kind of hero?" Marcus didn't flinch. His voice was calm, but there was steel behind every word. "I'm the man who's going to make you regret every decision you made today. Step away from him." "Now!" The wiry man barked a laugh, his face twisting into a sneer. "Oh, look! Another tough guy. What are you going to do? Call the cops? Cry about it?" The stocky man stepped closer, his fists clenched. "You don't look so scary to me," he said, his voice thick with disdain. "We've already handled one old man today. You're just next in line." Marcus's eyes narrowed, and he took another step forward, his broad shoulders squared. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," he said, his voice low and measured. The leader crossed his arms, grinning as he gestured to his companions. "You hear that, boys? This guy thinks he's special. Maybe we should show him the same lesson we taught the old man." James, still on the ground but watching intently, managed a faint smile despite his pain. "You really don't want to do that," he rasped, his voice tinged with a hint of amusement. The leader turned back toward James, his expression darkening. "Oh, shut up, old man. We'll deal with you after we—" He didn't finish the sentence. Marcus moved in a blur, closing the distance faster than any of them anticipated. His fist drove into the leader's jaw with the precision of someone who had thrown punches in far more serious situations. The leader staggered back, clutching his face as he let out a grunt of pain. The wiry man charged, his arms swinging wildly, but Marcus ducked beneath the blow and drove his shoulder into the man's chest, sending him sprawling backward. Before the stocky man could react, Marcus turned, his voice sharp and commanding. "Stay where you are, or you'll regret it." The stocky man hesitated, his bravado flickering. "You think you're tough because you got lucky," he snarled, forcing himself to charge. Marcus sidestepped, grabbing the man's arm and twisting it behind his back. The stocky man let out a pained shout as Marcus shoved him forward, sending him stumbling toward his companions. The leader, recovering from the initial punch, glared at Marcus, his face flushed with fury. "You think you can just walk in here and take us all on? You're gonna regret that." Marcus's expression didn't waver. "The only thing I regret is not getting here sooner," the leader roared, rushing forward in a blind fury. Marcus braced himself, stepping into the attack. Their bodies collided, but Marcus's solid stance held firm. He brought his knee up sharply, hitting the leader's stomach and forcing him to double over with a gasp. The wiry man and stocky man regrouped, circling Marcus. "You're just one guy," the wiry man said, his voice shaky but defiant. "You can't take all of us." Marcus glanced over his shoulder, his voice cold. "I've taken on worse than you. But if you want to find out, go ahead." The fight continued, blows landing from all sides, but Marcus moved with precision and skill. The gang was relentless, their numbers giving them confidence, but it was clear they weren't prepared for someone like him. Each attack they launched was met with a counter, each taunt silenced by a calculated strike. The tension in the air was electric, as Marcus moved with sharp, practiced precision, his focus unshakable. The leader lunged at him again, swinging wildly in frustration. Marcus ducked under the punch, driving his elbow into the man's ribs with enough force to make him stumble back, gasping for air. The wiry man circled behind Marcus, his movements erratic but determined. "You're fast," he muttered, his voice tinged with nervous energy. "But you can't keep this up forever." Marcus didn't respond. Instead, he turned sharply, delivering a swift kick to the wiry man's shin, sending him crashing to one knee. Marcus followed with a strike to the man's shoulder, forcing him to drop back, groaning in pain. The stocky man charged next, his fists raised like a battering ram. "Let's see how tough you are now," he shouted, throwing a heavy swing at Marcus's side. Marcus shifted his weight, narrowly avoiding the blow. He grabbed the man's arm and twisted, using his momentum to flip him onto his back. The stocky man hit the ground with a resounding thud. The wind knocked out of him. "Stay down," Marcus said coldly, stepping over him to face the remaining two. The leader had regained his footing, his face twisted with rage. He barked at the wiry man. "Get up! We're not letting him walk out of here." The wiry man scrambled to his feet, nodding, while the leader advanced again, this time more cautiously. The two of them tried to flank Marcus, their movements coordinated, but lacking the finesse of a seasoned fighter. Marcus dodged one attack, blocking another with his forearm before countering with a sharp uppercut to the leader's jaw. The wiry man saw an opening and lunged at Marcus's back, a grin spreading across his face as he raised his fist for a blindside blow. But before the wiry man could strike, a cane came down hard against his arm, knocking him off balance. The man cried out in pain, stumbling back to see James standing behind him, his face grim but resolute. "Thought you had me out of the fight, didn't you?" James said, gripping his cane tightly. The wiry man glared at James, clutching his arm. "Stay out of this, old man!" James smirked, taking a steady step forward despite his obvious pain. "Not a chance!" With a swift motion, he swung the cane again, this time catching the man across the legs and sending him sprawling to the ground. Marcus glanced back, a flicker of relief crossing his face. "You didn't have to get back up, Dad." James steadied himself, his gaze locked on the wiry man as he groaned on the ground. "You didn't think I was going to let you do all the work, did you?" The leader snarled, his frustration boiling over. "What is this? Some kind of family act? You're both done for." Marcus turned his full attention back to the leader, his expression cold and unyielding. "You made the mistake of picking a fight with the wrong family." The leader hesitated, his earlier confidence waning as Marcus advanced on him. The fight wasn't over, but the balance of power had clearly shifted. The leader growled, his fists clenching as he tried to regain his composure. He glanced at his two companions, both struggling to recover from the blows Marcus and James had landed. For the first time, there was hesitation in his eyes, a flicker of doubt that hadn't been there before. Marcus stepped forward, his posture steady and imposing. "Last chance," he said, his voice cold and commanding. "Walk away now, or you'll regret staying." The leader spat on the ground, forcing a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "You're all talk. We're not going anywhere." With a frustrated roar, he lunged at Marcus again, swinging wildly. Marcus sidestepped effortlessly, catching the leader's arm and twisting it behind his back in one fluid motion. The leader cried out, his knees buckling as Marcus forced him to the ground. "You're done," Marcus said sharply, tightening his grip. The wiry man, still wincing from James's cane strike, scrambled to his feet and charged at Marcus. But James, moving with surprising speed despite his injuries, blocked his path. With a sharp jab of the cane, he struck the wiry man's knee, sending him crashing back to the ground. "You'd think you'd learn by now," James said, his tone calm but firm. The stocky man, the last to recover, rose to his feet, his face twisted with desperation. He hesitated, looking between Marcus and James, clearly weighing his options. Then, with a guttural shout, he rushed at Marcus, his massive frame barreling forward. Marcus shifted his stance, waiting until the last possible moment before stepping aside and hooking his foot around the man's ankle. The stocky man tripped, sprawling forward onto the ground. Marcus quickly pressed a knee into his back, pinning him down. In less than a minute, the fight was over. Marcus stood over the leader and the stocky man, both immobilized, while James kept a watchful eye on the wiry man, his cane raised in warning. The leader struggled against Marcus's hold, his face red with fury. "Get off me, you bastard!" Marcus leaned closer, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "You don't get to make demands, not after what you've done." He released the leader's arm briefly, only to reach into his pocket and pull out a pair of zip ties. Swiftly, he secured the leader's hands behind his back, ignoring the man's curses. The wiry man tried to crawl away, but James tapped his shoulder with the cane. "You're not going anywhere either." Marcus approached, pulling another zip tie from his pocket and restraining the wiry man with the same efficiency. Finally, he turned to the stocky man, who had stopped struggling entirely. As Marcus tied his hands, the stocky man muttered, "Who the hell are you, anyway?" Marcus straightened, his expression cold. "General Marcus Carter," he said, his voice sharp and unwavering. "United States Army." The leader's face twisted in disbelief. "General? You expect us to believe that?" James stepped forward, leaning on his cane as he looked down at the leader. "Believe it. You picked a fight with the wrong man." Marcus stood tall, looking between the three subdued men. "You've assaulted a veteran and endangered the lives of others in this park. You're lucky you're walking out of here in one piece." The leader opened his mouth to retort, but stopped, his gaze dropping to the ground. James, his voice calm but filled with quiet triumph, added, "This is what happens when your hate blinds you. You lose." Marcus nodded, pulling out his phone. "Now, let's call someone to come pick up this trash." The low hum of distant sirens grew louder, cutting through the stillness of the park. Marcus stood over the restrained men, his arms crossed, his sharp eyes scanning their every move. Beside him, James leaned against his cane, his breathing heavy but steady, watching as the situation began to settle. Moments later, a patrol car rolled up onto the paved path, its lights flashing. Two officers stepped out, their hands resting on their belts as they surveyed the scene. One of them, a tall man with a commanding presence, approached cautiously. "What's going on here?" the officer asked, his gaze darting between Marcus, James, and the three men zip-tied on the ground. Marcus straightened, his voice calm but firm. "Assault. These three men attacked my father." The officer's eyes narrowed, moving from Marcus to James, who nodded in confirmation. "They came at me first," James said, his voice steady despite the bruises already forming on his face. "My son stepped in to stop them." The second officer crouched near the restrained men, who were now glaring but saying nothing. "These guys? They attacked you?" Marcus gestured toward the leader, who was still writhing against his restraints. "Him and his friends. They've been harassing people here. And today, they decided to pick a fight with the wrong person." The leader, his voice dripping with disdain, finally spoke up. "This is bull. They started it. We were just defending ourselves." The stocky man chimed in, his voice desperate. "Yeah, they hit us first. Look at what they did." Marcus's face darkened, and his tone turned icy. "You want to play the victim now, after cornering an unarmed veteran and beating him to the ground? Don't even try it." The first officer raised a hand to calm the escalating tension. "All right, let's get this straight. We'll need everyone's statements." "Sir," he said, addressing Marcus, "what's your name?" "General Marcus Carter, United States Army," Marcus replied, his voice sharp and authoritative. The officer blinked, momentarily caught off guard. "General? All right then. And you say these three assaulted your father?" "That's right," Marcus said, unprovoked. "They targeted him, harassed him, and when he stood up to them, they attacked. I arrived during the fight and subdued them." The second officer frowned, standing up from the wiry man he'd been inspecting. "And you zip-tied them yourself?" Marcus met his gaze without flinching. "Yes, they were a danger to my father and anyone else in this park. Restraining them was necessary to stop the assault." The wiry man spat on the ground. "Necessary? You're not a cop. You think you can just—" "Quiet," the first officer snapped, cutting him off. He turned back to Marcus and James. "We'll need to take your statements down at the station. Are either of you in need of medical attention?" James shook his head slightly. "I'll be fine. I've had worse." Marcus glanced at his father, concern flickering in his eyes. "I'll take him to the hospital once this is sorted out. But you'll want to check these three for priors. Something tells me this isn't the first time they've pulled something like this." The officers exchanged a look before the first one nodded. "We'll start by running their IDs. For now, we'll take them into custody and get everyone's statements." As the officers began securing the gang members, the leader glared up at Marcus. "This isn't over," he snarled. "You'll regret this." Marcus leaned down slightly, his voice low and unyielding. "The only thing I regret is not stopping you sooner. You picked the wrong fight, and now you'll face the consequences." The leader fell silent, his bravado crumbling as the officers led him and his accomplices toward the patrol car. As the officers began guiding the restrained men toward the patrol car, the atmosphere in the park seemed to settle, the earlier tension giving way to a sense of resolution. Marcus remained vigilant, his gaze fixed on the gang members as James leaned heavily on his cane, his weariness starting to show. The officers moved quickly, checking IDs and preparing to load the men into the back seat. One officer tightened the zip ties on the stocky man, who grimaced but stayed silent. The wiry man, still grumbling under his breath, muttered something incoherent, but didn't resist. The leader, however, was different. His eyes darted around, calculating and restless. His bravado had returned in small flickers, and Marcus noticed the way his fingers fidgeted, his legs subtly testing the restraint. James, watching from nearby, leaned toward Marcus. "He's planning something," he said quietly, his voice firm despite his fatigue. Marcus nodded slightly. "I see it. Let's stay ready." The first officer, preoccupied with his clipboard, stepped away to radio dispatch about the situation. The second officer moved to open the patrol car's door, distracted by the wiry man's complaints about the zip ties being too tight. The leader seized his moment. With a sudden burst of energy, he twisted sharply, yanking his arms forward and snapping the zip tie in a way that startled everyone. Before anyone could react, he shoved the stocky man into the second officer and bolted, his legs pumping furiously as he sprinted toward the tree line. "Hey, stop!" the first officer shouted, fumbling with his radio as he turned to give chase. Marcus's instincts kicked in immediately. He surged forward, his military training screaming for action. but James's voice stopped him. "Marcus, don't!" James called, gripping his cane. "He's not worth it." Marcus hesitated for a fraction of a second, glancing back at his father. James's face was pale, his earlier strength clearly waning, but his eyes were steady. The second officer, untangling himself from the stocky man, drew his radio and shouted into it. "Suspect fleeing southbound through the park. Requesting backup." The leader's figure disappeared into the dense greenery, his steps fading with the distance. The first officer cursed under his breath, abandoning the chase as he turned back to the others. "We'll get him," he said firmly, though frustration colored his tone. Marcus clenched his fists, the tension in his shoulders evident as he turned back toward James. "He's not going far," Marcus said, his voice low but determined. "If they don't find him, I will." James nodded, his expression hardening. "Let the police do their job for now. He'll slip up sooner or later." The two officers regrouped, their focus shifting to securing the remaining two gang members, who now looked shaken by their leader's sudden escape. The stocky man muttered something under his breath, but the wiry man simply stared at the ground, his bravado gone. Marcus glanced toward the tree line one last time, his jaw tightening. He knew this wasn't over. Not yet. The hum of the police car's engine filled the air as Marcus sat quietly in the back seat beside his father. The two remaining gang members, now subdued and silent, sat in a separate vehicle, their earlier arrogance replaced by uneasy stares. Marcus kept his gaze forward, his mind already working through the next steps. James adjusted his position slightly, leaning on his cane as he let out a slow breath. "You don't have to look so tense," he said, his voice calm but edged with weariness. Marcus glanced sideways at his father. "He got away, Dad. That's not something I take lightly." James gave a faint nod, acknowledging his son's frustration. "And he'll slip up eventually. You saw his face. He's desperate. Men like that don't stay hidden for long." The patrol car slowed as they approached the station, the flashing lights reflecting off the building's glass doors. Marcus shifted, his posture straightening as if preparing for another battle. The officer driving turned his head slightly. "We'll process these two and get their statements," he said, his tone professional but tinged with frustration. "We've got units searching the area for the runner. It's only a matter of time." Marcus nodded curtly, but his focus was unwavering. "I want access to the interviews," he said. "They'll know where their leader's headed. Someone always talks." The officer hesitated before responding. "We'll see what we can do, General, but this is still a civilian matter." James, sensing his son's rising tension, placed a hand lightly on Marcus's arm. "Marcus, let them handle this part. You've already done enough." The patrol car rolled to a stop, and the officer stepped out, gesturing for Marcus and James to follow. The cool air of the station lobby hit them as they entered, the sterile lighting casting long shadows across the polished floor. Inside, the two gang members were being led toward a holding area. The wiry man glanced back once, his eyes darting nervously toward Marcus. The stocky man, however, kept his head down, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The lead officer approached Marcus and James. "We'll need your official statements now," he said, his tone softer as he glanced at James. "You sure you're up for it, sir?" James gave a small, tired smile. "I've got enough in me for this." Marcus, ever the strategist, leaned closer. "Focus on their leader. Ask them about his next move, his habits. He'll run to somewhere he feels safe, and they'll know where that is." The officer nodded, making a quick note in his pad. "We'll bring it up during questioning. You can wait in the lobby or sit in the observation room if you'd like." Marcus turned to James. "You up for sitting in on this?" James shook his head. "I'll sit here. Let them do their job, Marcus." Reluctantly, Marcus followed the officer toward the observation room, his mind racing. He knew the gang's leader wouldn't stay hidden for long, but time was still of the essence. Back in the lobby, James settled into a chair, his cane resting against his knee. He leaned back slightly, his eyes closing for a moment. Despite the day's events, his expression remained steady, his resolve unbroken. Marcus stood in the dimly lit observation room, his arms crossed, as he watched the interrogation unfold through the one-way glass. The wiry man sat at the metal table, his hands still bound, his eyes darting nervously between the officer questioning him and the door. Across the room, the stocky man slouched in another chair, staring blankly at the floor. Neither looked eager to cooperate. The officer leaned in, his voice firm but calm. "Where's your friend? You've already been caught. Don't make this harder on yourself." The wiry man shook his head, his lips pressed tightly together. "I don't know," he muttered. "He didn't tell us where he was going." Marcus's jaw tightened. He'd seen this before. Low-level followers protecting their leader, holding on to a misplaced sense of loyalty. He didn't have time for games, not with the gang's leader still out there. Emboldened and dangerous. Turning sharply, Marcus left the observation room, his footsteps echoing in the quiet hallway. He made his way back to the lobby, where James sat in a chair, his cane resting against his knee. Despite the exhaustion etched on his face, James straightened slightly when he saw his son approach. "They're not talking," Marcus said, his tone clipped. "Or at least, not fast enough." James nodded, his expression thoughtful. "They're scared of him. More scared than they are of the law." Marcus paced the lobby, his hands clenching and unclenching. "I can't just sit here waiting for them to slip up. He's still out there, and who knows what he's planning next. If he thinks he can walk away from this, he's wrong." James leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but firm. "And what are you planning to do, Marcus? You're not a cop. You've done your part." Marcus stopped, turning to face his father. "I'm not going to sit idle while he gets away with this. I've spent my life leading teams, tracking threats, dismantling operations. I can do it again. But this time, it's personal." James studied his son for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You'll need more than just your experience. You'll need strategy, connections, and someone who knows how people like him think." Marcus met his father's gaze, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I was hoping you'd say that." James pushed himself to his feet, leaning heavily on his cane but standing tall. "Then, let's get to work." He made the mistake of underestimating the wrong family. We're not going to let him make it twice. Together, they left the station, their purpose clear. Marcus's military precision and James's hard-earned wisdom would be more than enough to hunt down the man who thought he could escape justice. Marcus and James sat across from each other in James's modest living room, the low hum of the overhead fan breaking the silence. On the coffee table between them were James's old notebooks and Marcus's sleek laptop, each a testament to their respective approaches, one rooted in wisdom and experience, the other in modern efficiency. "I made a few calls," Marcus began, his tone measured. "Reached out to some old contacts. Turns out our friend isn't just some small-time thug. He's part of something bigger." James raised an eyebrow, leaning forward. "How much bigger?" Marcus tapped on his laptop, pulling up a series of documents and mugshots. "The leader, the one who ran, is Gary Gunner Hughes. He's connected to a network of hate groups operating in the region. Small cells, but they coordinate. Recruitment, propaganda, and, when they think they can get away with it, violence." James's jaw tightened as he scanned the photos on the screen. "So, this wasn't random. They targeted me because of who I am." Marcus nodded grimly. "That's exactly it. They see someone like you, someone who's lived a life of service, someone who stands as a symbol of dignity, and they want to tear it down. It's not just personal, Dad. It's political, it's ideological, and it's dangerous." James exhaled slowly, his hand gripping his cane. "And the two we caught, they know all of this?" "They might," Marcus said, leaning back, "but they're low-level, muscle. People like Gary don't share much with their foot soldiers. But there's a pattern to their movements, and Gary's name has been flagged in a few incidents over the last year. Vandalism, harassment, assault. He's got priors, and they paint a picture of a man who thinks he's untouchable." James sat silently for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded. "So, what's the plan? How do we find him?" Marcus's lips pressed into a thin line. "We start with his network. He's not going to stay quiet for long, not with two of his men in custody. They'll have hideouts, fallback spots. If we can figure out where he feels safe, we'll find him." James tapped a finger on the edge of the coffee table. "Hate groups like this thrive on secrecy. They're careful about who they let in and what they share. You'll need someone who understands their mindset. Someone who can anticipate their moves." Marcus smirked faintly. "You volunteering for that job?" James met his son's gaze, his expression serious. "I've been dealing with men like this my whole life. I know how they think, what drives them, and I'm not letting you take this on alone." Marcus nodded, his respect for his father evident in his eyes. "Then we'll work together. Start digging into Gary's connections, tracking his movements. He won't stay hidden for long." As Marcus pulled up more information on his laptop, James flipped through his old notebooks, recalling names, incidents, and patterns from his past. Together, they began piecing together the bigger picture, one that revealed not just a single man on the run, but an entire network of hatred waiting to be dismantled. The next morning, Marcus and James sat in a dimly lit room lined with maps, notes, and a whiteboard they had quickly assembled in James's garage. The quiet hum of determination filled the space as they reviewed everything they had uncovered the night before. On the whiteboard were photographs of Gary Gunner Hughes and the 2 men in custody, along with a web of connections to names and locations Marcus had pulled from his military contacts. "This here," Marcus said, pointing to a run-down warehouse on the map, "is where one of Gary's known associates operates. We've got records showing meetings there in the past, but nothing recent. It's likely a fallback point or a stash house." James leaned forward, his hand resting on the edge of the table. "And this one?" he asked, pointing to another marker on the map near the edge of town. "A bar," Marcus replied. "One that's been flagged for hosting known members of these hate groups. My contact says Gary's been seen there a few times in the past month. If he's desperate, he might risk reaching out to someone there." James nodded, his face grim. "We start there. If he's running, he's going to need allies, and fast. He's arrogant, but even a man like him knows he can't do it alone." Marcus grabbed his phone, scrolling through recent updates. "I've sent what we have to a couple of my old intelligence buddies. They're running deeper checks on Gary's known associates. Meanwhile, I'll coordinate with the local authorities and let them know about these locations. If Gary shows up, we'll know." James frowned slightly, his fingers tapping against his cane. "And what if the authorities drag their feet? This isn't exactly their top priority." Marcus met his father's gaze, his voice steady.